You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am very happy to welcome Phil Linscheid. How's it going, Phil?
Hey, Dylan. How you doing, man?
I am doing well. So for those who don't know who you are and what you do, please give us the whole backstory.
I think that's most everyone. So my name's Phil Linscheid. I work at a company currently. Hamilton Company is the actual name of the company, which can be confusing. And I'm the director of manufacturing here, which is actually director of manufacturing machine shop. And so it's a really long title with a lot of different things that I do. But essentially, I'm responsible for everything that happens in the machine shop. So from materials being ordered, stocked, issued to work orders. I have a programming team. I have a manufacturing engineering team, inspection group, operators, supervisors. Currently, it's about 100 people that report to me. And during COVID, we had about 168, 170 or so that reported to me. And the company I work for, Hamilton Company, is a medical device company. So when you have pandemics, you get very, very busy. And so during COVID, we were very busy. We actually expanded and grew right before COVID, not knowing that COVID was going to happen. And then it kind of happened. And so, yeah, that's kind of the overall.
Okay. And Hamilton's a global company, right?
Yeah. So Hamilton is based in Reno. I work at the headquarters. It's a family-owned private company, but we have really four. So there's Hamilton Company, Hamilton Medical, Hamilton Storage that are all different financial entities to the family business. They're all owned and controlled by the same family members, but they share or don't share different aspects of the business. So they might share human resources, but they don't share the same bank account. So Reno is where we're headquartered for Hamilton Company. In Switzerland, we have Hamilton Medical, which is headquartered there. And then we also have a factory in Romania, and then we have a small manufacturing outlet in Massachusetts as well. And so the biggest manufacturing arm is in Reno. And in the machine shop here, we have, I think we have about 103 machine tools, not all of which are CNC. I think there's 93 that are CNC controlled. But it's a pretty big shop.
Yeah. I mean, I would say so.
Yeah.
That's a small shop, a real small shop.
Yeah.
Well, let's step it back then. How did you get to be director of manufacturing? I know one of the questions we had was, what does that position even mean? So let's get first your backstory and then get into what you do day to day.
Yeah. So like probably most people that kind of wind up in manufacturing, I was a pretty introverted kid. I played sports, but wasn't very good at them necessarily. I liked it, I had friends, but that was kind of the reason. In high school, so in the backstory, so almost everything that has gone well for me started with something going wrong. And so the first real big one was in high school, I played water polo and I was okay. I was decent. I definitely wasn't an all-star or anything like that, but I did reasonably well. In my senior year, I was cut from the team. I didn't make the team as a varsity player, was devastated. And to make me a little happier, for my parents to kind of get me out of this rut, my grandparents actually had owned a 1965 Mustang since it was new. And so it'd been in the family the whole time. And so they said, we need to get this kid from, out of the trenches here. And so my dad, my brother and I went and grabbed the car. And then for my senior project, I rebuilt the car as part of my senior project. And during that process, I learned a lot, hurt myself up quite a few different times. And that led to me being more mechanically, I always liked working on stuff, but it's really when I dove into it. And so after high school, I had a lot of passion and a lot of ambition, but I had no direction. And so I graduated high school. I didn't apply to college. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And my parents essentially said, you have to go to school, community college, if you want to remain under insurance. So I did what every kid does. I take the 4 required classes, English, science, chemistry or whatever. And I went to a community college called Losman Honest College in Pittsburgh, California. And they have a really good welding program, but I didn't know that. So I was walking around, stumbling around, I guess, and found that they had a welding program. So I went in there. There was a wonderful man, Andy Ochoa, who was probably 93 years old at the time and had the steadiest hands you'd ever seen in your life. And he really inspired me. So I took every welding class I possibly could that year and thought I was going to be a welder. I thought, this is what I want to do. I love it. I'm decently good at it, and I could focus to be able to do that. And then we met with a union rep, and I decided that's absolutely not what I want to do. This isn't for me at all. And I was in the Bay Area of California, and you wind up being, an underwater welder or something like that. And so found that there was a mechatronics program at Chico State in Northern California. And my dad actually lived in Chico. My parents divorced when I was a little bit younger. And so I did a late application to that and got in, and they required you to take a manufacturing class. And the manufacturing class was the degree that I wound up getting is essentially a 4-year trade degree. So every class I had was machining or welding or injection molding or casting or any of those things. And they all had 4 or 6 hour labs every week to keep a hyperactive kid like me busy. And
I was going to say, that sounds perfect for your temperament.
It was awesome.
Then. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so one of the things you make is you make a hoist winch from scratch. And, we learned how to take high-speed bits, just high-speed steel squares, and grind our own tools, and then use those tools to make Acme threads and then do single-point threading. And we did everything manually. And I remember the most humbling thing was I went to school to be a mechatronic engineer. That's what I thought, because I like all the things that mechatronics was, which computer science, electronics, mechanical stuff. And so I fell into manufacturing, and I just basically never left. And so I wound up graduating with a manufacturing degree. And I remember the most humbling experience was we spent probably longer than it should. I honestly don't know how long, maybe a week, single pointing one half of this part. And it was a hexagonal piece, and it had a bunch of turned down sections and then a single point thread. And you learn a lot about what you can and can't do doing that. I think I broke the insert or the high-speed steel a few times. And then they walk you over to the CNC lab, and they put the other half of that part into a Mazak quick turn. I think it was a quick turn 8. And then 32 seconds later, it was done. And it's kind of a humbling experience. And so, anyway, I went to college. That went well. I was a co-op at NUMMI before it was Tesla in the Bay Area for 6 months. And I worked in the quality department there and was on the Tacoma line for Toyota Tacomas. And then I went and worked at a steel mill during the summer of that same year, and where they take hot rolled, they squeeze it, they make it cold rolled. And that was the process. And they'd been the process since 1903. They really wanted me to stay, and I realized Phil Linscheid had nothing to offer to the steel industry in making cold rolled. It was not very exciting whatsoever, but very dangerous. There's a lot of big, heavy stuff there. And decided I didn't want to do that. So I actually went back to school, finished, and then I went to Haas Automation. And so I was actually at Haas from 2006 to 2012. I started as a manufacturing engineer, and I started in assembly, and they had a very big machine shop there. The machines always interested me. And at the time there wasn't a position, so I wasn't able to get into the machine shop. And I remember I was going to go, so I liked assembly, but I loved the machine shop. And I remember my boss, he actually went on vacation for a few weeks. And so I went over to the director of the machine shop and said, "Hey, I'm going to move my desk over here. Can you just tell my boss that was your idea?" And and Pete, I can't trying to think of his last name. Pete was the director. He was a guy from Britain, had this wonderful accent. And he's like, "Yeah, sure, I got you, Phil. No big deal." And then my boss came back and told everybody that it was his idea. Anyway, so I really love the shop. I did a lot of robotic installations. I wasn't programming, but I was involved in a lot of processes, and I was able to see. And most of the programmers at the time there were proper tradesmen. So they went to Rolls-Royce or Bentley, and they did proper 4 or 6 year apprentices. And these guys were a variety of different accents there, and just wonderful people, really, really talented.
So when you
And
were applying there, did you know of Haas already? Like, were you excited to work at Haas, or were you just looking for a new job and a new opportunity?
it really was as simple as, there was a company in town. So one step prior to that. So I worked with a guy named Jeff Lindsay, and he owns a company called Cutting Edge Products. And Cutting Edge Products makes glass blowing pipes, putties, and tools. And it's a very manual shop. So manual welding, we did a lot of silicon bronze. They would water jet D2, and then we'd hand sharpen these tools. He really wanted me to stay, and I just couldn't stay in Chico. It was a really small town, and I just had to get out there. And so Haas, I knew about it. We dreamed about the Haas machines because at school we had a Fadal 4020, and we drip fed everything. And it was a very, everything. Part of the education at Chico, which was really kind of brilliant, was everything was broken. And then if you wanted to use it, you had to fix it. And so I remember...
I'm sure that was totally intentional.
Yeah. It was, lack of funding or whatever. I remember spending, I think, like a month on an injection molding machine before we could run it. And then we got it to run. And we actually, once we got it running, I think we had people there 24/7 to make sure that it didn't stop running, because once it did, it may not turn back on.
Oh, boy.
And so I knew about Haas. I never really experienced it. I went to IMTS, or sorry, not IMTS. I went to West Tech. Chico State was really big into student competitions. And so I remember I went to West Tech in 2006, and right before I graduated, and Chico State usually did pretty well with those. And I remember going to the Haas booth, and one of the things Gene Haas, was insistent on is that every machine should be cutting and doing something. And as a young man, it was very impressive, and they give you the bags, and you walk around with all these, 20, 30 pounds of parts, and you think that's amazing. And then you realize you're going to throw these away later. But I was really impressed with the brand, and it was in Oxnard. And my mom's actually originally from Ventura, which is right next door. And so my plan was graduate, go live with my grandparents for free, and then go work at Haas.
Oh,
and my
cool.
grandparents wound up charging me rent, but that I didn't know that until after I moved there. So I was at Haas in assembly, went to the machine shop, did really well, got some attention from people there, and they said, "Hey, we have a management job open." And I'm like 26, 27. I still don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I think this is like 2 years. Yeah, I was 2 years in. So I interviewed for the job right before the crash of everything that happened in housing. And I got promoted when the crash was in effect. And it was so I applied for the job. I got the job. It took a long time, but anyway. And I got promoted to be a machine shop manager. And because they're like, "Hey, you know how to do stuff. Maybe you should do this thing too." And the irony of it all was, when I was at Haas, I became kind of the robot guy at the time. And I'm not going to claim that I'm the best robot guy, but I trained all the people and would change robot programs and develop training, and then also would rewrite programs based on changes we wanted to make. And it was all basic stuff, really, mostly pick and place type stuff. There's not a lot of hardcore math or anything. And so when I became a manager, I was still the robot guy, but I had a machine shop to run. And so anyway, I got into the management role, and I didn't know what I was doing. I think I had probably about 80 or 90 employees, and I didn't have any supervisors. And so if anyone that's ever been there, I had building 2. So building 2 had big Japanese horizontals. Most all of them were Moriseki or Hitachi Seiki, which of course is out of business. And then I had all the robot cells in that building. And so if there ever was a robot problem, I would stop being a manager and go be an engineer or whatever and go fix that robot problem. So it was a weird experience getting promoted when people were being laid off, and you hear all these, these really unfortunate stories about things. It was really weird. And then I became a manager, and I was 20 something years old. And it, as you can imagine, being a manager in a machine shop with people that know what they're doing, and then you have this young punk kid telling him what needs to happen. So I learned a lot of really good lessons very quickly. Most of them were taught verbally by people. And I loved the job. It was wonderful. But I actually, at one point, for some reason or another, I actually had the biggest department. And there were 5 managers, and I was the one that had the biggest department, the most parts, and the most things going on. And it was pretty stressful. I loved the job, but I also really struggled with, and probably maybe one of the lessons for me was I didn't realize what business Haas was in. I thought that, when you go to school, you want to do the best you can, right? You want to be the best. You want to get the best score. You want to have the best product. And I didn't realize that Haas Automation's business is not based on the best product. Mm-hmm. It's based on a valuable product that people can use, that people can make money on and make, good parts. And so it really kind of bothered me. It got under my skin that we were doing these things that were, quote unquote, the wrong way.
Right. Cost engineering, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm, yeah, exactly. So, my wife and I was working a lot. I was probably working 80, 90 hours a week, pretty regularly. I had a coworker, and at the time he would work Saturdays and then I would work Sundays. So I would work from, I think, 6 to 6 basically every Sunday. And my rule generally was if I had people there, I had to be there. And I split my guys in half. So they would work a 5-hour shift, and then I would have 2 5-hour shifts that would either overlap or not overlap. And I would be there. And so you kind of burn out after that. And so I found a job so during this process, because I was the robot guy, I met a guy named Ryan Berman, and he owned a company called Matrix Design, and they did custom robotic integration, and they're from Illinois. And Ryan, good guy, really good salesman. Let's just say that. And good guy, but ultimately, I was talking to him one day, and he said, "Hey, Ryan, I noticed that you're hiring. You have positions open." And I was jokingly thinking about applying. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Well, I would jokingly hire you." And I never thought. I was just messing with him. And so long story short, I moved to Illinois.
Wow.
And my wife and I, it was actually her idea. My wife, Elizabeth, her dad worked for Shell Oil. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's an oil brat. So every 2-3 years, they move to a different refinery in the country. She was actually born in Louisiana and then moved back to the United States to Texas.
Oh, wow. Okay. So she was getting restless regardless.
It's funny. She was kind of scarred from it, I think, but she knew that I really wanted to do it. It was so the job was to run this robotic company, and it was a pretty small company, like 20 employees. And so I did that. We went to Illinois. I absolutely loved the job. Dane, actually, he made a comment, and I remember Dane Friedel, and awesome engineer. I hired him at one time. So it makes sense so far. I feel like I'm just going.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. This is great.
So go to Illinois. Job is fantastic. Technically, incredibly challenging. I'm working more hours than I ever thought. I thought I was going to work less somehow. I worked more. I was traveling. I was driving a lot. I actually did 5 weeks straight in a place called Roxborough, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And they have a Walmart and they have an Eaton factory and they have like a gas station. And so I would go work there. I worked there 5 weeks straight, and a few weekends over the weekend and a few weekends I would fly home, and I would get there 5 or 6 in the morning, and I would stay until about midnight. And then I would go to Walmart because they were open. I'd get like a veggie tray. I'd go watch Duck Dynasty, and then I go to bed. That was like my routine, And at the time, after that long of a day, like Duck Dynasty just made sense, right?
Oh yeah.
I got an accent. I picked up an accent in North Carolina, and that went away eventually. But I'm definitely one of those guys that like starts talking like the people that are around me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, job was fantastic. They sold the job to a family business, and they started bringing in a whole bunch of people that, good people, good intentions. Let's just leave it at that. I wasn't very happy. Haas found out about it, and I talked to a guy named John Roth, who some people may know John. There were a tremendous amount of mentors that I've had. John is probably near the top of my list. probably right up there with a guy named Jeff Law, who both are, deep Haas guys and just wonderful people. They have definitely personas, but they're great guys. So John found out I wasn't happy and said, "Hey, what are you fucking doing? Come back. Like, what are you doing? Come back." So I went back on like a 3-day weekend to interview. And I sat down with Jeff, and he basically was like, "So you know us, we know you. You want to work here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so. Let me talk to Elizabeth." And so I moved back to California. We actually rented our house during that time because we weren't sure what was going on. And so we just moved back into our house with our same furniture. It was like we never left. It was very weird. And I was actually gone in Illinois only like 22 months.
Okay.
It was, but it felt like about 4.5 years in time, in years of time. And so went back to Haas, did well. When I came back, there was always talk of me taking over. So I came back, but I came back as a manufacturing engineer, which is something I think I'm more generally suited for, which I know it's kind of silly that I'm a director now of a machine shop, but went back to Haas. There was always talk of me taking the manufacturing engineering manager job. And one day I found out that didn't happen. One day there was a coworker of mine who they just decided he was the manager now. And there was no interviews. It didn't feel right. But for me, it sucked, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had been groomed for that. The directors of the machine shop and assembly were both telling me that, and they were right. I think that I was well suited for that job, but it stung. And so in the middle of all this, so a little bit backtrack. So my wife and I weren't able to have children. And so we were going through this infertility thing. She had a bunch of different surgeries, and it was pretty trying time. And in the middle of that, I was a machine shop manager working 80 hours a week. And realistically, I was running away. I was escaping from the fact that wasn't going to be our life. And for me, I didn't really care. I loved my wife. She's amazing. If we couldn't have kids, that's okay. It is what it is. No big deal. I'll be an uncle or an aunt or something. But it destroyed her. She was really devastated by it. She felt like I was upset. I wasn't ever upset about it, but she felt like she was letting me down. And so when we went to Illinois, that was like our attempt at kind of like restarting and like moving away from this, what we thought at the time was like a horrible thing. It wasn't going well. And so we went the path of adoption. And so I have 2 boys, both of which we adopted at birth. Benjamin, who is my oldest, he goes by Benny, and then Owen, who's my youngest. So they're 8 and 4. And we came back, went the adoption path. Ben was born in 2017. And I would say 3 months before he was born, before he came home, that manager thing happened. And for me, it was actually probably the exact right thing for me to happen. It was devastated. Thought I was going to be this manager. I thought this kind of thing was going to work out. I was working really hard to make sure that I could be the guy, and then I wasn't. And it actually was the exact right thing for me because it allowed me to kind of step back and be a better father and do the right things. And I'm really, I would never say I'm glad that we went through that, but in reality, I think it was the path for us. And had I been able to have a baby when we were trying, in 2010, I would have been a horrible father. I wasn't committed to anything but myself and the work, really. And so we had Ben, and then he was about a year old, and I got a LinkedIn request from a guy at Hamilton. And usually, everyone knows there's all these people that are, have the best interests of you and trying to do the right thing. And most of them are just trying to sell you and recruit you, but they're not actually working at the real place. So this guy's named Jeff Perkins, and Jeff actually worked at Hamilton. And so I had an interview with them on a Thursday. I remember it very clearly. I had an interview in my car at lunch, and they were like, "Hey, Phil, you've done a lot of stuff." And so, but it's not on your resume. It's kind of like these hobby type stuff. So while I was in Chico, kind of going back and forth, while I was in Chico State, I got a job at a fab shop. And so I basically started pushing the broom. That was what I did for a week or two until somebody called in sick. I think that's really what happened. And then they taught me how to MIG weld. All the welding I did was always TIG and gas and arc. So I never did any MIG welding. So I learned how to MIG weld there. I learned how to do a lot of stuff there. And then they would sell me scraps. And so I built a rotisserie for this Mustang that I rebuilt. And I designed and built this big thing, and it holds the car up and you can flip it around and get under it without having, it's just a shell. I got it down to the shell. And so the reason why that matters is I had my interview with Don Gay and this other guy named Jeff Perkins. And he said, yeah, the interview went really well. It seems like you know a lot of stuff and you've done stuff, but your resume is not very good. Like can you give us a portfolio that tells us all the things you've done? I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I stay up late that night. I remember Elizabeth was upset because we were going to do something and that didn't happen. And so I stay up late. I put this portfolio together. I send it, and Friday came around. I never heard that they got it. And so Monday came around, didn't hear anything. And by Wednesday, I'm kind of like, oh, well, that was fun. I got an interview. I wasn't looking to leave. Haas was great to me. I had a great team, wonderful people to work with, and really smart, talented, just a bunch of eager youngsters, really. And so the following Monday, so like the following week, I get a panicked call from Jeff going, we screwed up. Everyone loved you. We all agreed to bring you, but no one decided to call you. We all forgot to call you. So they said, hey, can you come to Reno? Can you bring your wife and kid? Can you come here now and do an interview? I said, my wife can't come, but sure, I'll come. So they flew me out on Thursday. I was supposed to have an interview on Friday from 7 to 11:30, and I left at 4:30. I was there all day. And about 2:00, Steve Hamilton, who's not a lot of people know Steve, and I still don't really know Steve, but he's been so good to me. He walks into the room with a big smile on his face and he says, Philip, we want you here. We love you and you belong here. So what do you say? You want to join us? And so he threw out a number and I was like, yeah. So I shook his hand and I accepted it on the spot. Wow. And then I called my wife and said, hey, we're moving to Reno. Now, to be fair, it's more fun to say it that way, but to be fair, her parents retired to Reno.
Oh,
and
perfect.
We knew what a good number was and we knew what we were looking to do. And so 5 weeks later, I inherited this machine shop. And so I started at Hamilton. I thought it was a machine shop. I thought things are running. You've got work orders. Programs are being created. I didn't think there was any kind of big problem. So I start to look around. I start to look into the data and I find that we're about 30,000 hours behind. Spindle hours. So that's like cycle time multiplied by quantity, right? Mm-hmm. And which is a lot.
Yeah.
So I come up with a calculation, basically it's very simple. Just, okay, what do we have in our forecast? What do we have in the future? What do we need to do? And I presented three options to Steve. And I said, look, if we need to just do what we need now with no growth, here's how many machines we need to buy. If we want to do 20% growth, which is you guys have been averaging about 22% year over year, we should buy this many. And if you want to go big, here's 40%. And the conversation was probably 5 minutes. And he goes, yeah, let's do 40. And so, which, when you work at a place like Haas Automation, everyone's an expert. You're a machine shop making machined parts for machine tools.
Right.
Everyone knows everything. And so when I came to Hamilton, that's not the case. In fact, most people here are scientists. I don't fit in. I don't tuck my shirt in. I don't wear a tie. I don't fit in, right? There's a lot of really smart, intellectual, highly educated people, and I stick out, And so, but when I told Steve this, he's like, yeah, let's do it. So I put together a plan. The first batch of machines we purchased. So part of the plan was, one of the problems they had is we had so Hamilton, is a relatively large Swiss operation. So we have a lot of sliding head lathes. Right now we have 35. They used to have a lot more different models. And so we had a K16, an M16, we had L720s, we had L12, L20, L32, A32, and a few others. I want to say there's at least another one in there. But anyway, all of those different models. And so what would happen is one machine would get loaded up and then you'd have to write a new program. And then that one would get loaded up and then you'd have to move it. So you're constantly moving and chasing. And the biggest work center we had in terms of mills we had 6 Haas VF4s. And so, which, good machine, a lot of people can make good money on them, but you can't, they're not automated. The machine stops, you open the door. And so in 2017, the year before I started, we did about 44,000 hours. And then we bought a bunch of machines. Punchline is we did over about 300,000 hours in a year.
Wow.
And we went from 900,000 parts to 5.1 million parts. And so a lot of people, and I didn't realize this until probably maybe a year in or 2 years in, Hamilton's actually a job shop. We are an OEM, but we're seeing an average of 4 new parts a day. We're seeing an average of 8 revisions to parts a day.
Jeez.
And so the just sheer volume, I honestly had no idea when I took this job. I was like, cool, machine shop. It gets me away from this job that I didn't get. And I'm closer to my in-laws who are lovely people.
Right.
Let's go. And I'm pretty much location agnostic. I don't really care. As long as the workplace is good, that's where I spend all my time mostly. And all my hobbies are related to work, really. So it kind of fits.
So how did you end up buying the machines you bought? Coming from a background at Haas, because was this first purchase, all the MAMs and things like that?
Yeah. My background was robotically loaded Haas machines and Japanese horizontals, and all linear pallet pull machines. There were a few cells. There was a few Toyota FA450s and S's, and then there was, I think that was the only 2 that were like just their own single cell, but everything was an LPP. And I hated linear pallet pulls. I lost a lot of hair and I added a lot of wrinkles due to linear pallet pulls because the robot would go down and then I couldn't load the machines, and the parts I was making were 300 and 500 pounds each. So you can't load them through the door. You can't load them through the window. There is a machine that we had at one time at Haas that I think was the largest linear pallet pull at one time. That's what I've heard. It had 6 load stations. It was an NH6300 DCG machine. So it had 6 ball screws for 3 axis,
those
dual ball screws.
DCG machines are so cool.
Oh, awesome. Except when the way cover goes wrong or bad, you cut it out. They build the machine casting and then they put the way covers on and then they put all the sheet metal on. And the way cover that covers the Y and the X axis on that machine is, at the time, this is like 2008, 2009, it was $20,000. And it took 6 weeks to get from Japan, and all the while Phil's not meeting deadlines.
Oh, no.
So there was a lot of horror stories that I learned. So when I came to Hamilton, they had a Makino, and Makino makes a great product. We actually were buying a lot of Makino when I left Haas, and but it was a linear pallet pull. And so at one point we were thinking, let's get more Makinos. Good machine. We got the space. And so I went with Keith Grano, who's a good friend. We met. I worked for Haas Automation, and so I didn't care for any dealer. It was very weird, right? It's weird working at the factory because it's kind of like a necessary evil to have dealers, right? You only remember the bad stories. And so I remember Keith was calling on Hamilton for a while, and he was trying to get a hold of me, and finally I'm like, fine, come, we'll sit down. Well, it turns out Keith went to Chico like maybe 8 or 10 years before I did. We had he actually used to call on the shops that I used to work at. So we have a lot of like similarities, and we hit it off. We were fast friends, and he's like, and I'm like, so you sell Haas, what else do you sell? And he's like, oh, we sell Matsura. I'm like, oh, cool. I know about Matsura, but I've never seen one really. I never really dealt with one. And so we went to a place in Upper Auburn area called Georgetown, and it's in California. And there was a company called, I think they were called, I'm trying to think, they made brackets to mount cameras on helicopters.
Okay. And
they had a machine shop at an airport, and they had one MAM running off a phase converter, and they had a whole bunch of Haas machines like 2.5 feet away from everything else. It was very, very tight. And so one of the reasons I was drawn towards the Matsura is at Hamilton, there's just a lot of stuff. And because it's a big job shop, what I did is there was a couple of different guys, and they printed all the prints for me. And I think there was 5,000 prints to start.
Oh my God.
And what I would do is your wife's a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
She brings homework and she's grading papers and she can zip through it. That's what I did in my evenings. I would go through reams of prints and I would pile them up based on the size and kind of what it would take. And so I knew I had a lot of parts that were pretty small. They would fit into a 35V very easily. And Hamilton did not have 5-axis. They were not doing any kind of tabbing. And so I went and saw that machine and I was like, this is it. This is perfect. It's included automation. It's proven. It's a Japanese machine, which means it may not be the latest technology, but it's going to work. Right. And there's not going to be a question.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Steve. I remember this vividly also. I went back to Steve and said, hey, I want to buy this machine. And he's like, Phil, you showed me you have to buy 15 mils. Why are you buying one? I'm like, well, there's a lot of differences here. We got 5-axis, we got a new brand, all these things.
Right.
And he's like, well, I'll buy one, but you better figure this out quick. I don't want to, we don't want to lose out on this. And so we bought one machine and I wrote a letter of intent to Matsuura. It was right before IMTS. This is 2018. And I wrote a letter of intent that basically said, hey, I'm going to buy 6 more. If this meeting goes well, and I met Katsu and Yuto and all the Cellway guys. And so I came back from IMTS and sent an email and said, hey, yeah, we're going to buy 6 more. So we went from 1 to 6 to 7 total. And that was where we started. Okay. And I had some pretty harsh rules with the programmers. I basically, I would go down and like I said, I'm not a programmer, but I know nonsense when I see it. And so, if we're doing pecking, if we're doing full retracts, anything like that, if the spindle speed's not at max, what are we doing here? We're cutting aluminum mostly in most cases on those machines. And so I also said everything's single op. Not a single part will have more than one operation. And op zero is not an option either. So we went with Lang. So we were actually, I think in 2019 or maybe 2020, we were Lang's biggest customer in the United States.
Oh, wow.
We would get them in the, like the cubic yard kind of crate, and we actually we had, my biggest complaint at that point was we had a bunch of we had all this cardboard, all this stuff, the packaging to to depalletize hundreds of vices and put pull studs on or it takes a lot longer than you realize when you're doing thousands of them.
I can only imagine. I mean, just unpacking our stamping unit and a few vices and all of that, it was like, guys, I love that it comes in undamaged. Fantastic. But it's like, okay, now I got to go fill up the dumpster outside with this stuff. Yeah.
So, so we bought 7 before all 7 were in. It was going very well. Currently, we have about 2,200 part numbers that are running through that work center. And there's 19 of that machine that are all one work center.
Wow.
And they're all identical. So they all have the same tool package. The vices are all the same. Now, not every pallet is the same. We have 77s on many. We actually have pyramids, three vices, as well as larger 125s. And it was actually a funny story. We went to Lang, and Lang makes a great product. I think there's no denying that, but no one thinks that Lang loves them, right? No one gets love from Lang. They go, hey, we're Lang. That's the end of the story, right? You don't need to talk to us. Like, what are we going to do for you? And so even though we were buying all of that, we went to Lang and said, hey, we want you to make a pyramid, but we want 35 degrees versus not included versus 30. And they said, no, we're Lang. We're not going to do that. Sorry. So I had an engineer design what they wanted. We went to 5th axis. They designed it. You can buy it now. And I think we bought, I don't know, 180 of these pyramids or something. That was our first order from them.
Right.
And so, Lang still doesn't make it, and 5th axis does still.
That's so frustrating.
Yeah. They make a great product. So we have 608 pallets in that work center right now on on those machines. So yeah, so the funny thing is so in 2018, I started in April. Our fiscal year ends in June. So June 30th is what Steve would call the end of end of the world. So we don't talk about after June until until after June. So I was trying to talk to him because I realized how bad it was. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. Make sure we can do the best we can for our year. We need to have a good year. So it took me a month or so to pin him down. And in August, we had this conversation. And so we bought, in that first year, we bought the 7 MAMs. I bought, I think, 16 Swiss lathes at that time. And then we sold a bunch of machines. So there was a whole bunch of one of this machine, one of that machine. And so we sold a lot and we liquidated a lot to make room. We actually had some Davenports as well that were really good machines.
Yeah.
One guy could run them or set them up. And I think there were 5 spindle. And they did okay. The part quality was decent, but because we're a medical device, it's got to really look good and have a certain finish. And we struggled with that. So those all got moved to sliding head. We had a couple Toyotas. We had an NH4000 DCG. We had a few Nakamuras, and a lot of that was sold and then kind of refined. So we kind of standardized the shop. So
Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. So I remember having a conversation with Dave Hudson, who at the time was a sales VP for Matsuura US, and then he became the president and he retired. And he came for a visit, and I was like, hey, I want to buy some more Matsuuras. And he's like, well, how many do you want to buy? And I'm like, I want to buy 12 more. And he laughed at me. He thought I was like joking. We hadn't even installed all 7 yet, and I'm like, I want to buy 12 more. He said, well, why 12? Well, that's how many I can fit in the building. And I said, look, I'm going to Steve Hamilton tomorrow to sign for this. You need to tell me when I can get these. And I need to know like right now. And so sure enough, I went to Steve the next day and we bought 12 Matsuuras right after that.
Wow.
Like in one capital. And the experience overall, it's weird. Being in Reno, I never really thought about this, but when I was in Oxnard or Ventura, basically LA, everyone's there. There's service techs, there's an endless supply of resources. And in Reno, you don't have any of that. You also have a big old mountain that people have to get over when it's snowing, and things just don't happen when it snows, which was new to me. I didn't think about any of those things. So anyway, we bought the MAMs, we bought a bunch more machines, and in February of 2020, I got together with my staff and I said, hey guys, we're going to do March Madness. We've got all these machines. The last Matsuura was being commissioned in 2020, February. It was going to be fully operational. And I said, we're going to turn everything on and see what this thing could do. And that's when COVID happened. Oh. And so right before that, the shop was ready, really eager to like get this thing going. And then COVID happened, and then we went crazy. We were doing, a lot of hours. We were producing about 6,000 hours a week.
Jeez.
At that point, we actually did more than that. I think we got up to 6,800 hours, but just a ton of parts. We were doing about 120,000 parts a week. And all of, it's funny looking back. I never realized, I had zero idea that any of that was going to happen. I really think the reason Steve liked me and the reason he wanted to hire me is because I included all these pictures from me building that Mustang. Steve's a big car guy, but he's like a real car guy, like cars that are, 100 years old and all these other things that he's into. He literally has there's 6 that were made and there'd be 4 that he owns, right? Ever. So he's a different car guy than like a Ford Mustang guy, right? Like me. So even we're the most car guys in the area, but not the same. And so anyway, so COVID happened, made a lot. And then in 2020, we expanded. We bought another building and we bought a bunch more machines. And what that turned into is we bought DMG Mori NHX 5000 machines. And the main reason for that is that we could get 20,000 RPM spindle. We're doing a lot of aluminum, sometimes plastic, and we could get 21 pallets. And so we didn't stick with Makina. We actually did a head-to-head. So we ran the same G code on a DMG machine, and then we ran the same code on our Makinos that we had, and the DMG was a clear winner from a cycle time standpoint.
Oh, wow.
And for me, cycle times are, so everything comes back to cycle time. So if the cycle time is accurate and the cycle time is low, the cost is low because everything's calculated based on this time standard. And so I kind of have to chase cycle time because that's how you keep the cost down. Because your cost per hour is a hard number. It's not moving. Right. At least it's not moving very often. Maybe a couple times a year. So yeah. So right now we're not producing that much. After COVID, everything kind of figured itself out, and we're producing about 3,000 hours right now a week, and about 100 employees. So one thing, we didn't have any reduction in force or anything like that during COVID, which was great. There's actually people on my staff that have been employees at Hamilton longer than I've been alive, and I'm 43.
Wow.
There's a lot of longevity at Hamilton, which is fantastic, but it doesn't help the young guy make a mark in a good way sometimes, because I've got to change a lot of things.
Well, so actually, I've got a question about that. So you've mentioned multiple times now that you've come into companies as the young manager. Uh-huh. Can you share what you've learned about how to, first off, going into Haas that first time, you're 26, you're thrust into a managerial role with probably a lot of people much older than you. What are some lessons you learned in becoming a manager so quickly?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I thought, and I'll tell you what actually happened. So all the managers had goatees, and all the managers had short hair, and all the managers yelled a lot. And so I thought, hey, I'm going to be like them. I'm going to grow my goatee out. I'm going to be all angry. And it turns out I'm not good at being angry at people. I'm not. The problem is that what actually happened is I faked that anger, or I would get really riled up, and then I would flip that switch, and then I'd flip it back off when I would go home. And then after a while, it stopped flipping. It just became angry. And so what I found is that, and we all do this, you think what the other person's thinking, you think that the story. And so I just go talk to people. And I found that I think I'm I'm very capable of having a conversation in person. I'm significantly less capable when it comes to phone calls, and I'm the worst in terms of email or text because I'm very direct, and that comes across as mean. The only thing I could do worse would be caps lock, right? That's the only thing that I could do to make it worse. And so what I found is I just have a conversation and go look, and just, for me, it's trying to own it. So, if there's a problem, hey, this is a problem. I'm the director. It's my fault. Everything is my responsibility. We got to figure this out. We can't not figure it out. What do you need from me? Or, hey, and sometimes it's also just calling it what it is. Hey, man, you fucked up big time. This sucks, doesn't it? You feel like shit. Well, the reason you feel like shit is because you're a good person and you care. So it's okay to feel like shit. I'm not going to be mad at you. That's why I love having you around. You don't have to. So one thing I do is I really try to hire people that have good character. Mm-hmm. And my definition of that is who they are when things don't go well. And I found that if I can surround myself with people that care as much as I do, or close to it, because I care about a lot of things, that they manage themselves and they'll beat themselves up. I'm the one that has to pull them back from the edge of the cliff, right? And so that's part of it. Also, I when I first started, I would send an email. I would never say, Good morning, Dylan. How are you today? I never did that. I was like, hey, Dylan, the thing I need, it's got to be done today. Thanks. Bye. Right. I wouldn't even tell thanks. Right. And I thought I was being efficient, but it turns out people like that. And I didn't realize that. And,
what do you think it was in your life that led you to be that empathetic though in person? Because I don't know that I've dealt with a lot of managers. I've talked to a lot of managers. I don't think that many people come by that mentality easily of hey, I can see you're hurting. Let's work this out together.
Yeah. For me, it was a desperation. I was an ineffective manager being angry. And so I had to be successful. And also, when I was a manager at Haas, it It was arduous. Things weren't going that well. Right before I gave my notice to go to Illinois, they changed VPs around, and the guy that I was reporting to, I remember that LPP wasn't running, and I was standing at the machine. It was like 9:30 in the morning, relatively early in the day, and I'm looking at this machine and it's not running, and the VP comes by and I tell him the issue, and he's like, "Hey, what do you think they're going to be done?" And I thought, they'll probably be done around 10 at night. And I knew that I was staying until they were done. And he said, "Well, persevere." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, what?"
Yeah.
and so for me, you ever heard like you have to break it before you can fix it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to me. My soul was crushed multiple times over, and I had nothing else to do but go take a step back and go, well, that was not fun. And it's also really hard to connect with people when you're in the trenches with them. And that's one thing that I really loved about Haas, is that everyone was solely focused on shipping the machine or getting something done or getting ready for IMTS. I actually miss it still to this day, because it was harder. It was a harder job, and a lot of aggressive personalities, a lot of people and so a lot of it was, there was an aggressive, I think maybe another way to say it would be, it's a good question. There were a lot of really aggressive people that I reported to. And so I was the guy delivering the message. And so it was my opportunity to go, okay, guys, he said this, but what he means is this, and we can work on this together. And I think the other part of it is I think I'll stick with the desperation. A lot of times I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so I just had to go experience it myself. And so I would go load machines, or I would go change tools, or I would go, fix a probe, or anything that I could get my hands on, anything that people would let me do, really. I remember, so at Haas at the time, I think they still do this, they wore uniforms. So managers wear very clean white shirts in a machine shop and black pants. And I remember when I resigned, they're like, "Wow, your shirts are really dingy. You could have swapped them," because they do a laundry service, but they don't swap them unless you ask. And I remember, like, because I would get really dirty. And they're like, "You could have swapped these out. You could have looked a lot better for like years." I'm like, "Oh, well, no one said anything. I guess I didn't look that bad." And they showed me what a clean one looked like. And I was like, "Oh, wow, it's just not good."
That's your badge of honor right there. That means you're in the trenches. I love that. Well, keeping with that managerial aspect, so when you went to Hamilton and bought these new machines, how do you go about building a team or pruning your current team to be able to jump into that new challenge? Because like you said, you had no 5-axis, no automation like that. I think that, just thinking about it makes me nervous of like, how do I make sure that this team is ready for it? And if not, how do I go about letting people go and hiring on new people to take on this challenge?
So I was really fortunate. A lot of the people at Hamilton were wonderful and great and talented, and completely wasted. They were not doing the right things. The expectations were very low. And then we would celebrate those poor expectations. And so they were excited, because I'm like, "Hey, you're going to get a 5-axis. And oh, by the way, there's going to be 19 of them. And oh, by the way, I need a program tomorrow." Right? Like it was a challenge. And really, I didn't have to prune anybody, really. Everyone was like, "Yeah, let's do this. This is awesome." And part of it also was, there's this thing at Hamilton where they'll say Steve said. And so Steve Hamilton's he's the managing director now, but at the time he was the CEO, and his son is taking over. And Matt is his son. He's wonderful, a really good guy. And people would say things for Steve, having never asked Steve. And so I went in and said, "This is what we're doing." And they're like, "Holy shit, this guy got Steve to agree to it." Yeah, because I just asked him. It wasn't a big deal. and like he's the the guy behind the curtain. And right. I just went in and I would go in and say, "Hey, I want to do this." And I remember it took me probably years before I was comfortable with it. I'm still really not. But at Haas, everyone was an expert. So I couldn't go to Gene Haas and be like, "Hey, Gene, we're going to do this thing. And he'd be like, F you, get the hell out of here. You're fired, by the way. Who are you? What's your name? Right? So when I went into Steve, I was like, hey, I want to do this. And I was like, what do you think? And he's like, what do I think? I've been doing it wrong for years. What are you asking me for? And that was the interaction. And so, no joke, I would go in and go, hey, my thing with Steve is, I learned so many small lessons. And one of them was also like, know your audience. And so when you need to buy, $15 million worth of stuff, there's a lot of forms and there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of things that accountants need to see. But I would never show Steve any of it. I would give him the report. It would be on his desk, but I would have a conversation before the conversation to say, hey, I'm going to come in. You're going to get your pen ready. Right. And then he would look at me and he'd be like, what the hell is this guy doing? And then I would sit down, I'd look him in the eye and say, this is the best choice. This is what we're doing. And he would ask questions and try to challenge me. And I would have answers. He's like, well, I'm satisfied. Where do I sign? And he never opened the capital because I looked him in the eye and I had a conversation. I related to him and I had all the answers. I mean, I knew exactly what it was. I have the lowest form of learning and memorization, and that's my happy place. I can memorize. I probably have hundreds, maybe thousands of part numbers memorized for no reason. There's no reason to do that ever. But there's just things that just stick in there. And I can't remember, a lot of things. You can ask my wife, but I can remember part numbers of a part I made, 5 years ago or something.
Right.
So,
so what about going down the chain then? As you're hiring people, you said, you know how to program, you know how to do this, but you're probably hiring people who are much more skilled than
everyone.
you in those.
100%.
So how do you evaluate people to join your team and know that they're going to be successful?
So, one of my favorite things so there's this speech that I do, and the speech is essentially, so my expectations is I'm looking for three things. It's very simple. I'm looking for AER, attitude, effort, and results. And I need all three. I need you to have a positive attitude that says we can do this, even if it sounds like we can't or it could be hard. I need you to think we can. I need you to work at it. I need you to put the effort in. I need you to try. And I need you to understand that the results aren't going to be instant, but they have to exist, right? We have to eventually do something so we can make money. The second half of that speech goes, we're not a bunch of geniuses. I'm not the smartest person here. And if you can come in, get results and be an asshole about it without trying hard, this isn't the place for you. We are a bunch of average people that refuse to fail. And that's how I've been. I think that's the answer, right? For me, of getting into this job or any job is just, I just don't give up. And there is no limit to how many hours I'll put in to make sure that it happens. And so I very much look for people that have a drive, will, grit, something like that. I really hate the word expert. I don't like it. I think that for me, so I've interviewed and hired a lot of manufacturing engineers. And one of the first things I ask them is, hey, what do you do in your spare time? What do you like to do for fun? And if I can find somebody that wants to do the stuff that we do at work, but they don't get paid for it and I can pay them for it, they'll love it and they'll never leave. And so I try to find people that want to do good because it's fun, not because like I'm telling them how to do it. And so I've been really fortunate to find a lot of different people that care and are willing to fail. Failure is kind of like cancer, though. I don't latch on to that word. A lot of people think failure is bad, and I'll say, "Wow, you failed at that," and they're like shocked. But I'm like, failure's not bad, guys. We can call it you fell or you fell down or something, but it's the same thing.
Oh yeah.
And so for me, when I'm hiring people, I do that speech. I go, hey, what do you know? What kind of stuff do you know? Do you know how thick a piece of paper is? Do you know have you ever used an MPT thread? What's the angle of an MPT thread? And it's a trick question because there isn't an angle. It's a rise over run thing. And it's 3/4 of an inch over a foot, by the way. But and I have that memorized and I have no reason to. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need to know that, but I can't not know that. And so I ask them questions like that, see what they know. And if they tell me they don't know, I'll hire them. If they tell me they know and they can't answer, that's a big, big problem. Another thing that I like to do is if I'm hiring, so when I hire an engineer, I say, hey, welcome to Hamilton. It's your first day. there's the shop. I'll see you in 6 months. You're going to go run parts. I know you know how to run parts. That's fine. Go run them again.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is really 2 reasons. The first reason is I need you to understand what the hell you're doing. And if you're making routings and you're making work instructions and tooling and processes, and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to make a lot of people unhappy. And the second reason, and maybe the most substantial reason, is I want you to go work on the floor so you have a team of advocates that are going to help you. If you're a new guy, and this is something I did not do. When I first became an engineer, I went to the floor and told them exactly how it's supposed to be done. And I told the manager too. And they would, beat me up verbally, And so for me, it's a matter of, I like to put people in situations and see what happens. And if they fail, that's okay. It's not passing the test isn't the goal. It's finishing the test, or at least persevering through it. So sometimes if I'm hiring an engineer or someone on the shop floor, if I can, it's not always possible because it gets weird, but I try to have them come in and I'll go, hey, let's go work in the tumbling area and load parts in the tumblers for a day. And, I find the loudest, dirtiest, stinkiest job, and I'll go do it with them. And there was one guy, Adrian, and that's what he did. For a second interview, he came in and we tumbled parts for 3 hours. And we just chatted and did work. And I would drop stuff on the ground. And if he picked it up for me, I'd realize, okay, cool. He's paying attention. He cares about this. These little tests that people do. And, I'm not the person that invented this. People talk about this all the time.
Right.
But, I just would kind of see what they can do. And ultimately, so what I talk to with my staff is manufacturing is the same as chaos. It's literally the same word. You just don't know it. You've been told that chaos and manufacturing are different. That manufacturing is orderly and organized, and it's just not. And that's, I think, why I love it, is the fact that it's not the same. It's not making cold rolled steel. Even that can go wrong, but it's not fun. It's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I imagine making cold rolled steel is much like, for me, watching a NASCAR race, where the exciting bits are very few and far between, and that's the stuff I want to watch, but it's not the best thing for the show. Yeah,
my favorite part of NASCAR was I would do a thing called a NASCAR nap, and I'd watch the beginning, fall asleep, and then wake up for the end.
Oh, I love it. So let's turn the coin on that. What are things that somebody would do that would make you fire them? What are the traits, or what are the things that you've seen in shops that are a no-go immediately?
Integrity is the biggest one. If you screwed up, if you made a mistake, if you broke it, I don't care what you did. Just tell me what happened. So there's been a lot of books that I read, and it's funny because I don't think of myself as a book person, but there's actually a lot of books that I read with my staff and different people. And the first book I read right when I didn't get the management job was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And I'm an over-carer, which is why I work so much and why things have worked out, is mostly because I just don't know any better. And so I have to kind of read that book almost every year to stop caring about the stupid shit, because there's so many things to care about, and none of them, you can't affect all of them, right? And so another book that I've read is a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that book with my staff.
From the podcast.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I've read that with a bunch of different groups, for everyone from machine operators on the floor to supervisors, manufacturing engineers. And I want to fight for ownership. And if I can argue, if someone's going to argue with me that it's their fault and not mine, that's a good sign of character. So most of the firings that I've done, because I've done a few, but most of them are not technical in nature. They're behavioral, right? Mm-hmm. They're, hey, you can't steal from the company. Hey, you can't key this guy's car. Right. Hey, those kinds of things. Most of it is, I have a very high expectation for myself. I have a slightly less high expectation of everyone else. At least that's what I'm trying to go for, because I think that my expectation of myself is very high, but also I feel like I'm failing at that. So it's not a good place to just exist in, but that's my existence. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like I need to be this perpetual chip on my shoulder to kind of go through things. And so most of it is just integrity. If you screw up, tell me you screwed up. If you made a mistake, it's no big deal, right? I'm I think you've talked about it, or I think your former boss said, get all the failings out now so I can trust you.
Yep.
Similar thing, right? This starts you on the Haas machine when I can replace a spindle for $6,000, not when you get on the DMG Mori with $60,000.
Right. It's actually funny, as a side note, I was recently talking to my first boss the other day, and I mentioned to him that quote, hurry up and fuck up so I can trust you, has been such a guiding force for my career. Yeah. And he just started laughing. He goes, oh, one of my old bosses said that to me. And I just repeated it. And I never thought in my life that I'd ever hear it again.
Yeah.
So
that's how it goes.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Managing people is difficult. It's very difficult to control what people hear and what you say, and putting those two together. People is the best and worst part about being in management, I think, is that it's just difficult, right? Whatever rule applies and works today doesn't apply and work tomorrow, necessarily. And so for me, one of the things I think that helped me when I came to Hamilton is they have a picture page with his picture of everyone's face and their title. And my wife was a teacher for 11 years before we came up here. And so like a school teacher, I printed all of those pictures out and made flashcards, and I put the picture on one side and then the name on the back. And so because it was important for me, it's important for me to know the people that are working with. And I know everyone, right, in the department, and I'm involved in all their hirings. I review every review. I know what's going on in their lives. I know when they're having a bad week because I can see it. So I have a very different, I'm kind of an enigma to myself, frankly, because a lot of times I feel like I'm very intuitive. I can see when people aren't feeling well, but I'm also the densest person to where you have to literally tell me, I'm upset, Phil, sometimes. And I'm like, oh, you're upset. Cool. I didn't tell because your shoulders weren't shrugging or whatever, I think it's just setting expectations. Everyone says this. There's been very few people, I would say, I don't know, maybe like less than 1% or maybe 1% of people that have reported to me at some point that want to do a bad job.
Right.
Everyone wants to do a good job, and they want me out of their life. They don't want to talk to me. I'm the bad guy, right? I'm the boss. And so the best we can support them, but at the same time, not be a big part of like their day to day, not overshadowing them. But yeah, I don't even know if I answered your question. I'm not even sure what it was, but
no, definitely. Are there any things that you've found that have helped that kind of team aspect? Do you do daily meetings? How do you get that face-to-face time with everybody and make sure that everybody, knows where you're steering the ship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've done every variety of that. So when I first started, I didn't have any supervisors. So I would go talk to like the leads of the areas. You'd have like maybe 10 machines or like 5 machines, and there might be a person that's kind of the go-to. When I was at Haas, we'd call them floor captains, but it wasn't an official title. It was just the guy that would respond the best. And in some cases, it was the guy that knew English. So you just go talk to that guy. And so for me, it's talking. I walk a lot. I'm out on the floor a lot. A lot of things have been going recently. I'm not as on the floor as much as I used to, but that's my favorite place to be, frankly. And I think I said this on another video, but if I'm having a day where I'm like, man, I don't really want to be in my office, I'll go run the mat server for a while, load parts and unload parts, break things off tabs, sand things, whatever. And that's my thing. I think on Saunders' podcast, he talks about days off in the shop. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a short story. So there's this one area that was really struggling, and we weren't producing the hours we needed, and we were falling behind. And my customer is internal, so they know where I live. They can find me very easily. They can come, walk to me. And we weren't doing very well. And we're having countless conversations and meeting after meeting. And I'm just like, this is stupid. So one morning, I just decided I'm just going to go work in there. So I went there in the morning, and I just ran some Haas machines for half the day just to see for myself, because I can't really know what's going on when I'm on the outside. And one of the downsides to being in a position that I'm in now, which I don't like at all, is that my reality isn't reality, because when I show up, I change the world, right? And I don't mean that in a weird way, but people know I'm there, so they don't behave like they normally do.
Right. People stand up straighter when the boss is around, kind of thing.
And I hate that. I absolutely hate it. I So on one hand, I want to know everybody, but at the same time, I'd really love it if they didn't know me at all. And so that's one thing I think that's really helped is when they're having a problem, hey, show me. And I'm not a machinist. I've made parts as a manufacturing engineer and stuff like that, but I know how things go together. I know how they work. I know the terminology. I can give them advice on things because I've seen it or been around it and just kind of, that was one of the things about working at Haas. I worked there 11 years and I probably put in like 15 or 16 years of time there or more.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I'm 43, I can have the conversations. Even though when I was 28, I could have the conversation because I'd already put in 4 or 5 years in time. And so I think that would be one piece of advice in terms of like, how do you get into these roles? When you're young, work like an animal. You have to learn it. I mean, for me, I'm kind of a dummy, so it takes just time. And that's the only way that I've ever been able to be successful is just being there and doing it and failing it over and over. And so when, I had buddies that were working 40 hours, I was working 60 or I was working 65. And it's kind of in me now. And so even when I don't have a lot to do, I come in early, I stay late.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself walking around or looking at things or picking things up and asking questions. And so I think, taking an interest in what people are doing is a big part of it. But
do you have any formal meetings or anything like that for how do you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I've done everything. So when we were really not doing well, we used to have daily quick meetings every morning, go, hey, this is the goal for today, because we have a very finite list of things to do. I don't generally like meetings because I'm a silence talker. So when people don't talk, I'm talking. And so if there's a gap, I'm talking. And if they're looking at me with weird eyes, I'm explaining in a different way because it feels like they don't understand. So I'm going to explain it to them again. And so I, as a part of survival, I try to avoid meetings because I'll be the one that talks more. And so right now, every Sunday, there's a whole bunch of reports that are sent to me automatically that we've built in Power BI. And I take those reports, they all come over as a PDF. I combine it into a single PDF and I cull it. I take out some pages that don't matter. And then I send an email to my staff, my direct staff. It's 9 people. That's manufacturing, engineering, production supervisors, and maintenance. And I go, hey, these are the things that I see. These are the things I focus on. Look at page 3, look at page 7. And the reason I do it is because I like having that archive. I like having that PDF. I can go back and look because all of our reporting is live. So as time goes on, the past and the future can change based on data changes. And so I do that very often. I also have daily reports that send out to people. What we've been doing recently, which has been really helping, is we do a lot of Teams chats. So there'll be like a group chat that says it's like manufacturing engineering leaders or whatever. And so we'll be a chat on different things and I'll say, hey, where are we at with this? And I try to avoid meetings. They'll get to it when they get to me. And I would say one thing, like a pet peeve, is if you're going to respond, so no one in my staff can say the word waiting. That's a trigger word for me. Don't ever tell me you're waiting. If you're waiting, that means you're taking no action. If you tell me it's on hold, and I realize the absurdity of this, but if you tell me it's on hold, I understand. It's on hold and you've decided for it to be on hold. But if you're waiting for someone to get back to you, you're not doing your job. If someone says, well, I emailed them. Well, go find them. Go walk down the hall. Go walk across the street. Call them. If they're in town, drive over to their house or their shop. You don't wait. There's no waiting. And so everyone knows that. So, but I realize it's maybe harsh, but there's certain things that I'm like, nope, we're never saying that again. And another one is people will say things that are done. And if it's not done, I go, you mean done? And they're like, yeah, it's done. So I can do everything. Oh, no, you can't do that yet. Well, it's not done. So I live in a very black and white and stuff like that. So yeah, so meetings has been all over the place. One thing that I was doing, and it's kind of happened and not happened when you had the pandemic, but twice a year, I would actually have small meetings in my office with 10 to 15 people. And I would go over where we're at with the company. Hey, how's it going? What are we doing? How do we produce? What kind of quality issues are we having? And I do it in a small enough group to where people feel comfortable to talk to me. And I would do 10 to 15 meetings that are the exact same meeting twice a year with just these small groups of people, both shifts, shift 1 and 2. And it'd be a really long week and I would lose my voice. But I found that it helped people understand. One thing that I did not do when I started at Hamilton is I was making a bunch of decisions and they became the plan. So I'd say, hey, we're buying MAMs. This is what we're going to do. You got to do this stuff. Okay, now it's going. And I never explained why. And I didn't tell them that there was even a choice. It was just, this is happening. Mm-hmm. And it was, part of it was, I mean, all of it was intentional, but shock and awe. That's what I was going for. I was going for, hey, how do I shock these guys into excellence here? Or at least having some kind of energy towards it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we have some fantastic questions from the Patreon from Doug. His first one, you've stated in the past, I like having a villain to chase. What are the villains that you are currently chasing?
So when I first started, it was machine capacity, and then it was more machine capacity. Then it was processes. But right now, it's pretty benign. It's actually got me pretty antsy. So when I first started at Hamilton, most of the problems were in the shop, and that was my focus. And I wouldn't say the problems were only in the machine shop, but those are the ones I had to deal with. Those are the ones I'm charged to fix. Mm-hmm. And right now I feel like the machine shop is doing very well. We've got great staff. We're doing really well. Our trajectory is going up. We're ramping up. And so I'm kind of antsy. The kinds of problems that we need to fix are systemic corporate problems. They're, hey guys, our quality process policy says we have to do this, but it doesn't need to be done. But the policy says it needs to be done, but we can't update it, like those kinds of things. Uh-huh. You got a big company, you got a lot of things going on. How do you change that? How do you, and the way that ISO works generally is you say what you're going to do and you do what you said. Yep. Well, the problem is when you have a company that's been around since the 40s, we've said a lot of things. And so we have to do things even though it's not logical. So better example is, so we've got a lot of sliding headlights, and recently we changed our inspection interval and our inspection policy. And so what it used to be is we would say, hey, every quantity of parts, so every 25 pieces. Well, as anyone can tell you, that doesn't mean anything because 25 pieces could be a very simple part. It could be this long on the bar feeder, or it could be 10 feet.
Right.
And so we changed with sliding headlights. The biggest issue with tolerances really is, do you have the bushing adjusted properly? Do you have enough clearance, but not so much clearance? Not too much, not too little. Mm-hmm. And is the bar consistent enough to where you're going to get a consistent result? And so we changed it to say, hey, we're going to check the first part and we're going to check the last part, and a lot of the bar. And that could be 1,000 pieces. It could be 40. Mm-hmm. And that was simple. It was easy. And generally speaking, most of our bars are pretty good in diameter. They're pretty consistent with it, a few tenths. And we can grind and some other things too, but generally speaking, it's helped. So a lot of the things that the villain right now, honestly is me. I'm antsy. I don't have, I haven't bought a lot of machines, I haven't spent any money recently. So it's like, I don't have these big and what's funny is I look back at, all the things we did, and I have no idea why I thought we could even do any of that. I didn't know we did so many things and so many installs. And, right now the Matsuras have, 2,200 parts, as I mentioned earlier. And there's probably, 3,000 programs that did not exist 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And then there's a ton of revisions. And if I would have thought that would have happened, I can't even imagine doing that, or thinking about it, right? It's hard to find the recipe. And, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, Doug, so. But
yeah. No, definitely. His next question was, what are your top data integration lessons learned so far?
So there's really two basic lessons when you're dealing with data. Is you got to vet the data, make sure the data is good, but you also have to draw a line in the sand that says this is good enough. If you go for 100%, you'll never get there. And if you are as reckless as I like to be, you'll have to go back and do it again. And so that's, I think, when we're dealing with all the different things, you can make a really bonehead error, and then you start doing the math and it's wrong. So I would say you want to vet the data as much as you can, but you don't want to do it too much and then just go, so that you can start. Probably maybe the third lesson is you don't really know what you got until it starts to work or not work. And so it's kind of, I would equate it to like a post processor. You got to have it something that it's not going to just obliterate something else, but it's got to be good enough to just work, and then you can refine it. And there are definitely people that are significantly better at, tweaking post processors than I am. But at some point, you just got to make money. And even if it's not exactly perfect, at least you can ship some parts and make some chips and move on.
Okay. His next one is, what is your vision of manufacturing nirvana?
That's a good question. So I think my vision really would be, I think a lot of the problems that I see, and this is medical device, which I'm sure you guys are, what you're doing every day is kind of similar. I know you're not necessarily doing medical, but there's a lot of tolerances that are required that aren't required. And so, and I think the nirvana is, for me, if we could somehow get back to, you think about how manufacturing was before we were born. You think about what they were able to achieve with paper and sketches. And I find that even though we have these amazing tools to design things, it's not as though the designs are better,
right?
Necessarily.
Well, it feels to me like we've lost that sense of collaboration between customer and machine shop. Like, I know I've worked in shops where, this dimension is out, but we have a 40-year standing agreement with the company that was worked out when the part was actually engineered, that's actually fine.
Yeah.
And, that's not something that happens anymore. It's got to be to the letter of the print. And like you said, the prints are way over toleranced. And I think a lot of the people who are making them don't quite understand what they're asking sometimes.
No. And what happens sometimes is, we got these Matsuras, and one of the engineers was like, I went on their website and I found out what the repeatability is. So this is the tolerance. And it's like, but you're not accounting for the fact that, the shop is controlled temperature wise, but we live in high desert, man. We'll see a 60-degree swing. The building's going to see some change. It's not going to see no change.
Right.
And so, we've actually had gauges that we checked, and then we put them in our pocket, walked to the end of the building, and then now they're out because that's how tight the gauge needs to be. So nirvana for me is bringing those things back. I really think that there's a guy in my group, his name is Mike Hermanson, and he has an idea, which I love. He said, what we should do is anytime an engineer comes up with a prototype, we'll give him the part and he can go inspect it. And I love that idea because then they'll, they won't know the method to do it. Or maybe they'll learn. Maybe they know already, and maybe there's some kind of super genius. But the idea is that to me, I think, is the biggest problem in manufacturing. I mean, the technology is amazing, but we're using it for the wrong reasons. One of my favorite quotes to think about is, do you remember in Jurassic Park when the scientist with the leather jacket, I can't remember his name or actor or anything, and he's
Jeff Goldblum?
Jeff Goldblum, exactly.
Yeah.
And he's like, you were so focused on what you could do, you never thought about if you should. And I love that quote because that's exactly it. You look at it and you go, man, these machines are, they're holding microns. And it's like, yeah, but should you really need something like that? The best example is I have a couple 3D printers at home, Prusas, and I've had one since 2018. And the 3D printer is made with 3D printed parts. And it has a load cell, and it does a mesh bed level, and it goes and touches and measures it, and the print comes out perfect. And it's not a perfect machine.
Right.
And the software, it's a software pill for a mechanical ill. And it's great. It's wonderful. It works great. I built it in my garage for $700.
Right. Yep.
And it's pretty fantastic. It's amazing, right? And obviously Bamboo, and there's so many good printers now, but that's, I think, nirvana for me is if we can focus on like that chasm that exists now, and I feel like it's getting bigger. So yeah, so yeah. Anyway, that's I think the perfection for me would be. I think there are needs for tight tolerances. Don't get me wrong, there absolutely are. But for example, you shouldn't have a positional tolerance on a threaded hole, for crying out loud. What the hell are you doing? A threaded hole is a clearance hole by definition.
Yeah. Well, and my favorite is that engineers don't understand that if they don't put the minor diameter note, that then it applies to the pitch diameter, which is then nearly impossible to inspect.
Yep.
So like you said, like have the guy inspect that. Oh, how are you going to get to that pitch diameter?
Yeah,
oh, no, we don't have screw in things for that.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Right. Yeah. Have fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Last one, and this one was a well-researched question that I had no idea. He says, I'm assuming that you've been around baseball due to your father. If so, what is your favorite baseball-related story?
So we talked about this a little bit before. So my dad was involved with starting some minor league teams in Chico when I was younger. And I'm like most folks probably, I wasn't good at sports necessarily. And we were talking about earlier. So I actually worked concession at the stadium during the summers. That's how my dad would go to work at the game, and then I would work concession. And my brother was a bat boy. And my younger, he's larger than me, but my bigger brother, Jonathan, and Johnny, as we call him. And he was a bat boy. And there was a case where there was one time where he was so focused on going to get to the bat that he ran out to get the bat, but the play wasn't done. The play wasn't dead.
Oh, no.
And then the guy running in from third laid him out. And he just laid there still. The crowd was like, like you could hear it. It went in silence. And then the coach or everyone got all upset. There was a bunch of people that got kicked out of the game because of my brother. He was fine. But my dad was like, oh my gosh. And they got it on video and everything. And so that was like my most memorable baseball experience, is watching my brother get, laid out at the stadium. And so it's pretty funny. Yeah. Yeah. So any Linscheid that you ever meet is related to me. It's a really pretty small, I think there's like less than 500 in the country.
Oh, wow.
And so, if you meet anybody related to me or anything with the last name, they're from the original clan that came over from Europe. But yeah, weird.
Awesome. And then his question to me was, what aspects of your journey are most applicable for today's Prodium and where you and Brad want to take the company? And actually, that's why I was, grilling you on managerial stuff, because we have not hired anybody. I think we're probably going to invest in automation before we start hiring, because we just really need that right now. But that's just something I have a lot of hesitance about. Like I am also someone who holds myself to a very high standard, and I think both Brad and I are. And I can see it being very tough to not hold other people. Like, of course, why wouldn't you get that? It's so easy, and I never want to be that kind of manager. Yeah. And so I constantly am trying to sponge up any good advice I can get on that stuff.
Yeah, it's weird because I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, obviously, I've been a leader, manager, director, whatever, for years, but I never really consider myself to be any good at it, because it feels like just as soon as I do, you fail. And I think that knowing that day is happening and is going to come is a hard realization, because people are very difficult. And not to say it's bad, it's just that it's a moving target and you never know what's going on in someone's life. And so it's very difficult to know, are they dealing with something at home? Did they have a hard time at work, or, whatever. And so there's a book that I read years ago called First Break All the Rules, and I don't remember the author. And it talks about, these different golden rules. Like, for example, you're not supposed to be friends with people that work for you, right? There's all these different rules you have that we've put in place. And I think I never read books in high school or college unless I was absolutely told to do so. And that was the first book that I really read. and I highlighted it and actually made like a little summary for myself. When I was traveling for training for robots when I was at Haas, I traveled a lot. I think I went like 250 hours of training for robotics at some point. When I would read that book, I read different books, and it's tough. I know you've had some really good interns though. I don't think Justin's going to want to come over, but you know, interns are a good way to kind of step into it, I think. And you'll know, I think if you're paying attention to like the things you care about, the person that you're going to bring in will actually, maybe be better at some things, like commenting in Fusion on the different items and these different things that you've mentioned, things that like, that you never take the time to do because you're always so busy. So I don't know. I've said multiple times that people are hard, and I don't mean that I'm a person that I've really enjoyed all the things that have gone wrong with me or things that have happened to me, because the best example is, when Elizabeth and I moved to Illinois to escape our infertility problems, they followed us and we had to deal with it. And I don't know that we'd still be married had we not had infertility problems, because we got through that. And I can't imagine being with any other human being because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's the same thing. Like I've had arguments with people, and I wouldn't say screaming matches, but definitely arguments that are escalated and have a certain tone and maybe some bad language words in them. But if you can get past it, it's usually better.
Right.
And so I really cherish, I'm going to say pain, but I really cherish like uncomfortable times. And I don't like look forward to them, but when they happen and you can step back to it and you can kind of get over it, put your ego aside, then it's usually okay.
Right. Right. No, that's great. The author is Marcus Buckingham, by the way.
There you go.
I want to make sure that everybody knows that.
Yeah, it was a good book. Now, there's a lot of books I read, and I wouldn't say necessarily that any one of them are right. I think they have a right place. I've definitely had book club books that we've read, and we read one book called Leaders Eat Last from Simon Sinek, and that was a shit show. It's a great book. It has a great message, but the thing the book misses, in my mind, is the book assumes you're doing your job well to begin with. And then it's how to be a better manager, how to be a better leader, and doing your job well. And so I had a couple guys who are great guys, Jacob and Ryan. We did not get along on this because they thought I was minimizing their thoughts and feelings. And I'm like, I don't care about those because you're not getting this job done. We can't talk about the next thing until we can pay our bills.
Right.
Right. So let's make sure we pay our bills and the machine's running. And it was the worst book club we'd ever had. And it made me like rethink maybe book club's not a good idea. But great book, great message, but it doesn't really lay in. And now it's like Simon Sinek's like third or fourth book at this point. So maybe I should have read all the other books first. But anyway, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that brings us on to shop news and new things. Anything new or exciting going on in Hamilton?
Hamilton's going to be more the same. I will say there is a project I'm working on, and I'm going to be looking for some programmers and some operators. I'm looking for character. I'm not looking for expertise, someone that'd be willing to move to Reno. There's a project I'm working on. I'm very excited about. Can't talk about it, but if you're interested, if you think that you don't have the skills, but you want to, you're the exact person I'm looking for. You can be a hack just like me and just work hard at it. That's really what I'm striving for. If you're an expert, I might be interested also, but ultimately, I've had significantly better respect or better results with people and giving them a chance. And that's, I think, honestly, what Steve Hamilton did with me is, he walked in with his big old smile and said, "Hey, come on board." And I'm like, "You want me here? Well, I guess I want to be here too."
Awesome.
So I'd say like nothing, it's a lot of programming, a lot of software and machine stuff, but ultimately really exciting there. Yeah, nothing at Hamilton really that's not part of that project.
Okay.
But yeah, nothing really big.
Well, let's get on
Yeah.
to the last questions. These are from the Patreon. They all voted on them. One cam, metrology, or business tip or trick that has helped you this week.
Okay. So I would say this is a relevant thing. So my background is in manufacturing engineering and, machine shop management, I guess. And the tip or trick I would say is kind of what we were talking about before with like data integration. And that would be spend, it's the Pareto's law, put 20% of your time and energy to get 80% of the way there and then go. It's good ideas. If it's a good idea and you fall asleep and you wake up and it's still a good idea, just fucking do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can plan for everything. And one thing you'll know for certain, and this is why manufacturing is chaos, nothing is going to go to plan. And that's okay. It's one of my favorite lines from the Batman movie with Joker and Christian Bale. And he talks about if the plan's horrific, no one cares because there's a plan.
Uh-huh.
And as soon as there's no plan, everyone freaks out.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, that's manufacturing perfectly. So I would say just go for it. And failure is how you get there. Really, truly. You don't know what doesn't happen or it doesn't work until it fails completely. Obviously, so I mentioned 3 things I care about. There are 3 other things, and that's safety, quality, production. So the lecture is don't hurt anyone else, don't hurt the equipment, don't hurt yourself. Make good product, and then we'll figure out how to make more of it. But just go. And as long as you're not being reckless and you're going to get anyone killed or hurt, then let's break some stuff. Right.
Awesome. What challenge are you facing and where are you looking for help?
That's a good one. So I would say the people side of it is definitely one of them. Right now, the challenge that we're in, and I'm really feeling this. I've been feeling this for like the last 6, maybe 9 months. Is there's this convergence, and you can feel it, right? You can see it. I'll use examples. Fusion is better than it's ever been. You have Toolpath and their group of all-stars that are, going to dominate. I love every single one of those guys. They're just so amazingly unique.
Big thanks to Tim, by the way, for telling me I needed to reach out to you. Yeah.
Tim and I, so funny. So Tim's actually, I could drive it to his house in less than 2 hours.
Oh, really?
We actually hadn't met until probably a few months ago. But he knew who I was because he was really good friends with Keith. And so he was out celebrating, drinking when we bought all those machines from Keith, and he was making all that money. So, but we hadn't met. And so he came for a video, and we actually didn't even eat lunch. We took a video and we chatted all day, and he's just awesome. Really appreciate him. But so there's this thing happening, and the thing that it's not scaring me, but it's on my mind. And that is, my concern with Hamilton, or really any company for that matter, is what if we don't keep up? I mean, Toolpath is releasing updates daily, almost, it seems, weekly for sure. Fusion is every other week. You've got all these things that are going on. The technology is moving at such a pace. And probably my biggest concern, where I need the help, is how do I keep up with it, right? I can't even keep up. I mean, I listen to this podcast. I listen to Saunders. I don't know if I have any more time to listen to anything else. How many more videos can I watch? Like, I'm being saturated with all of these changes, and I can't keep track of what Toolpath changed and what Fusion changed and what Cutter stuff is changing and what machine tools are doing and what's probing going. There's just so much.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm completely inundated. Mm-hmm. And I love it, but I feel like it's nearly impossible to keep up with it. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's sleep even less or something, but yeah,
I think that's probably a good reason to have a great team. Because, you can't do everything, but altogether, if everybody's looking at their corner of the internet, you should capture at least a lot of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, for sure. And the problem I have is that a lot like this is my thing. So like, all of my YouTube videos are manufacturing based or 3D printed based. So like, I don't really have a hobby that isn't this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of, I don't even know where to direct people. That's, I think, the scare in this part, the part that I'm like terrified with. But
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of amazing things that are happening, and it's really cool to be part of it.
Oh, totally. A work-life balance, what does it mean to you and how do you manage it? Is it any different from 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah. So, I'm kind of an odd one. I like waking up early and I like staying up late. So, so work-life balance is different. It's different in this way. I dedicate time to my wife and to my kids, and then I just stay up later. So it used to be I would stay at work really late, and then I would go home and be tired, kids go to bed, and then go to bed. And what I do now is I leave work at a more reasonable time, spend time with them, but I just move that time to after they go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so like probably my like flow state or like my happiest moment is, sitting with my laptop, doing something in Fusion, or maybe I'm doing some calculations for a quoting for a customer, or doing some kind of thing that I'm doing for work. And from like 10 to midnight, headphones, some like, for lack of a better word, like electronic music. And I'm just in this weird state, and it's like euphoria for me.
Yeah, the flow state.
Yeah, flow
There's
state.
nothing like
exactly.
it.
And that used to be tacked on to the end of the shift at work.
Oh, I gotcha.
And so I would stay at work until 8. I would feel amazing. I would go home. My wife would be disappointed because she married me to be around me, not to just have a different name.
Right.
And so it's hard because there's so many things that are, trying to get my attention. Hamilton actually has probably the best work-life balance that I've ever been, but I don't abide by it. I get here too early and stay too late mostly, just because it's out of who I am, and it's different. I've gotten a lot better. I put the phone down. I'm with my kids. Don't bring the phone out. Put it away, put it in the sock drawer or whatever. And then, try to really pay attention and listen. That's one thing that I kind of struggle with is I can physically be there. I can hear what you're saying. I'm not listening. I'm thinking about something else. And then when they ask a question, I fail that test, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or my youngest, especially, I feel like for whatever reason, he gets ignored a little bit more. And so he repeats his question just until we answer it, just 4 or 5 times over. And then my wife's like, Phil, what are you doing? Where are you? I'm like, oh, yeah. What's up, Owen? What's going on?
Yeah. You're like, I'm thinking about that part that was tough today. Like,
or something, man, that thing got under my skin, that thing that someone said or whatever. So
yeah,
it's different for sure. I definitely think that it's hard, but I really enjoy it. I like the idea that, like I was talking about, I couldn't work at a place that wasn't different every day or was easy. I'm not good at easy because then I get distracted and then I lose focus. In school, I was always the kid that would flounder until the night before, and then I would be motivated to get it done and stay up late and feel great because I had this like rally. Meanwhile, I didn't get sleep and it wasn't my best work, but I just couldn't motivate myself, or I wasn't disciplined enough to like do the right thing.
Right.
And that's kind of how it is now, really.
I can
just pile on more and more
empathize.
stuff. Yeah.
I am right there with you. Second to last, what thing that doesn't really pencil out that you've bought that you wouldn't be without just for reduced aggravation, fatigue, or aversion?
Well, I have 2 3D printers that are both not printing right now. It's very easy to, there's that one moment where I'm like, I need 2. So I bought 2 3D printers. There isn't a lot. I mean, quite honestly, this sounds silly, but those 19 Matsuras, they were calculations as hours. They weren't calculations as to anything beyond that. I didn't it could have not gone any better. And the one thing I would add is, so we have a factory in Switzerland. And if anyone knows anything about the Swiss, and if you are Swiss, I'm sorry to offend you, but the Swiss are uber Germans. So they're the best European that they make. They will tell you. and so when you're a dumb American and you buy 5-axis machines to do 3+2 tabbing, they they don't understand it. And they would actually go to my boss and tell me that it wasn't the right decision and I was making decisions and I had to defend it. And that actually, those conversations happened after the money was spent, which is a harder position to be in. And now it's the best work center that we have. It has the best productivity ratio, so that the most amount of hours being produced for the amount of hours being put in. Mm-hmm. So right now, general rule of thumb is if I have a machine, I need one person on and 1 8-hour shift in 24 hours. So if I have 19 machines, I just need 19 people to cover a 24-hour period of each machine. Now, they could be on shift 1, shift 2, and then you obviously have to account for vacation sick. So it winds up being like 20 people or 21 people or something.
Still fantastic.
But yeah, it's fantastic. And we've had the most success with bringing people in that are non-machinist. And, there's several people in that area. I mean, my dumbass can run them, right? So like, of course, they're not hard once they're set up properly. And the programming group, they've really come up with a lot of really cool stuff.
What do you guys use to program?
So, there's a sticking point, man. That's a whole nother podcast. So when I started, we were a Swiss company and they were really proud. So when I started, we had Gibbs Cam, Mastercam, and we had Esprit and we had Fusion.
Jeez.
And that's not how it is today. We have two. We have Fusion and we have Esprit.
Okay.
So Esprit 20XX, and I know Zap will tell you it's horrible, and I think it is, but it's the best you can get in sliding head in multi-channel.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody dispute that, actually.
No. What they won't tell you is that when you get into 5-axis, that it's a 5-figure, like $50,000+ to buy the software. Maybe you know that already because you've been investigating it.
Yep.
But, and if you want to add probing, it's $8,000. And if you want to do 3-channel, there's a whole nother thing. And we've given them so much money. Now, it is fantastic at multi-channel. It's not the best 5-axis. So we use Esprit for most of the areas. When we started, we had Camplete, and that was when Camplete was its own company before Autodesk acquired it. Mm-hmm. And we've since moved away from that, but we're using Esprit and we're using Fusion. And awesome. So I'm a big Fusion fan. I'm a fanboy. I've had Fusion since it was out, mostly from a design space, just design stuff that I would do. But I really think it's come so far that really Hamilton should be using it, frankly. And we save a little bit of money, but the biggest reason, and I think that people don't talk about it maybe enough, is the reason why I think Fusion is the right thing is because I can buy a seat and I don't care if I don't use it, so I can have it available for someone when they need it. You cannot do that with Esprit. You can't have a $50,000 license sit around.
Right.
I can't even buy a 50, like I've got to do a capital. I've got to get everyone to approve it. I can buy Fusion without anyone's approval.
Throw it on the company card, like call it a day.
Done.
Yeah.
How many do you want? 10?
Right.
And so there is no path right now for Esprit. We've hired programmers and they have to learn Esprit. And there's no chance of training them because we don't have a dongle for them sitting around.
Right.
And so that's one thing that like I think probably you need to do at some point is, their programmers are cringing if they're listening to this. They're like, oh my gosh, this guy, he's never going to give up. I'm never going to give up because it's fantastic software, but I don't think we need it. Mm-hmm. I just don't. Most sliding head customers that don't use Esprit are using HandCam. They're doing it by hand at the controller. Or they're using like PartMaker or something.
Which is almost impossible to buy at this point.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So, last up then, what have you been researching this week? Doesn't have to be manufacturing related, though I have a feeling it might be. But what's been popping up in your browser?
So actually what I've been looking at is, for the longest time, I've really wanted to have a chip bruschetter or pucker. Mm-hmm. We make a ton of chips and I would love to be able to do it. The problem is they're just so darn expensive. Yeah, they are. And the way it never works. That never pencils out. So if I could buy one, that would be the answer to that question. But they're so expensive. But I feel like it would be amazing if, I think it's Roof, RU with an umlaut F. They make briquetters. They have a green symbols or whatever. And they have a new one that supposedly you could put under each machine's chip conveyor. And it's smaller and it's compact, but it's still $55,000.
There's another brand that does that as well. I don't know it off the top of my head, but Chris Fox, who was on the podcast a long time ago, he had them on his machines. I'll have to find the brand name for you.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But that's something that I've been looking into a little bit more. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. That's the most recent thing I can think of.
No, it's great. I would love a chip. We don't even make enough chips to really justify one, but just to not have to deal with that of wet chips and storing them and all, it completely eliminates that pain point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that it should make sense. I mean, really what should happen is that I should start a company that makes a really inexpensive one.
Right.
And then, hey, here's 10 grand. You could buy 10 grand, right? I mean, it's not an automatic saw.
I mean, at this point, how long is it before Haas comes out with a $10,000 briquetter?
I think we just gave them an idea. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has really been fantastic to get to know more about your story and get to know you. Yeah.
Cool, Dylan. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be included in it. And it's been fun. I feel like I talked a lot, of course.
I mean, I hope so. Yeah. That's what the people are here for.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, again, thank you so much. Thanks to all the Patreon members who make the show possible. They let me send people like Phil mics and headsets so you can hear them. And thank you all for listening. I will be back next week.